January 22nd, 1783, Congress ratified a contract stating that all bills of credit emitted, monies borrowed, and debts contracted by or under the authority of Congress before the assembling of the United States in pursuance of the present Confederation shall be deemed and considered a charge against the United States. The party that the U.S. owed these loans to? King George. I hope this paints a picture for you of how Great Britain funded both sides of the revolution.
Suddenly, strangely, something happened. Europe is empowered with a power which the rest of the world combined cannot match. If you think this happened by accident, you should go and buy a house in Disneyland. Yes, that's where you should go and live. Europe is empowered for the first time in its history with a power which the rest of the world combined cannot match. And Europe uses that power to attack the rest of the world and colonize it. If you think that happened by accident, go and live in Disneyland. When Europe colonized, it was something very sinister going on. It was made even more sinister because suddenly one day Europe started to withdraw. They call it decolonization. And as Europe decolonized, the natives now, they have something that they call, I don't know if you heard about it, independence. Independence. And they have a flag, and they have a national anthem, and they have a hodgepodge of an army and so on. And then sometime in the middle of the night, they would have the lowering of the flag and the raising of the flag, and they'll be dancing and so on. And they say, we've got freedom. But the European will be hiding behind a mango tree and laughing his belly out. Look at these one-eyed fools. They think they have got freedom, that they drove Europe out. No, Europe withdrew for tactical and strategic reasons. But before Europe withdrew, decolonized, Europe planted some truly dangerous seeds. But the only way you could recognize those dangerous seeds is if you have nur from Allah. Not just knowledge that you get from the books. That's important. Yes, that is important. But you need something more than that. The first seed that Europe planted, of course, I told you about it already in my lecture on Imam al-Mahdi and the return of the Khilafah. That is in the essence of Islam that you must recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Al-Malik, the one who possesses Al-Mulk, sovereignty. That's the translation for Mulk, sovereignty. But now Europe leaves behind a dangerous seed called the modern secular state. And the modern secular state declares, we no longer recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Al-Malik. The state is now Al-Malik, sovereign. And that is shirk. And I explained to you the same thing about power, Al-Akbar, and the same thing about Al-Hakam, the one whose law is supreme. So go back to that lecture and you'll understand this. So this was the seed of shirk, political shirk, which was planted. How many Muslims saw it and recognized it? How many of our distinguished and learned ulama, for whom we have respect, we don't speak disrespectfully of them, not at all. How many of them recognized that this was shirk? We even had ulama in politics. Yeah, ulama in politics. We even had Islamic movements becoming a political party and fighting in elections like everybody else. Still going on now. Incapable of seeing the shirk of the modern secular state. I told you about my arguments with Taliban, and I couldn't succeed in getting Taliban and its ulama to understand this point. But the second seed that Europe planted before withdrawing was the seed of transformation of money. Money was no longer going to be sunnah money, money which had intrinsic value, but rather we now have a new kind of money, it's paper money, and it does not possess intrinsic value. The Prophet ﷺ prophesied that we would follow those who came before us, step by step. And even if they were to go down into a lizard's hole, he said, we will follow them into the lizard's hole. So they asked, O Messenger of Allah, who are you talking about, the Jews and the Christians? He said, who else?
See that guy standing next to the president? You know, the one that looks like a butler? His name was Don Regan, the chairman of Merrill Lynch, the richest and biggest retail brokerage firm in the world. He took the key position of Treasury Secretary so he could enact the tax cuts that the rich wanted. Regan then became White House Chief of Staff as the president started to fade.
Then they should give the president what 43 governors have, a line-item veto. And
Who tells the president to speed it up? The man from Merrill Lynch, that's who. Things in America would never be the same again. The country would now be run like a corporation.
we're going to turn the bull loose.
The American Revolutionary War began as the American colonies sought to detach from England and its oppressive monarchy. Though many reasons are cited for the revolution, one in particular sticks out as the prime cause: that King George III of England outlawed the interest-free, independent currency the colonies were producing and using for themselves, in turn forcing them to borrow money from the Central Bank of England at interest, immediately putting the colonies into debt. And, as Benjamin Franklin later wrote, the refusal of King George III to allow the colonies to operate an honest money system which freed the ordinary man from the clutches of the money manipulators was probably the prime cause of the revolution. The founding fathers of this country were well aware of this. It is important to note, Nazi Germany's war effort was largely supported by two organizations, one of which was called IG Farben. IG Farben produced 84% of Germany's explosives, and even the Zyklon B used in the concentration camps to kill millions. One of the unspoken partners of IG Farben was J.D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company in America. In fact, the German Air Force could not operate without a special additive patented by Rockefeller's Standard Oil. The drastic bombing of London by Nazi Germany, for example, was made possible by a $20 million sale of fuel to IG Farben by the Rockefeller Standard Oil Company. This is just one small point on the topic of how American business funded both sides of World War II. One other treasonous organization worth mentioning is the Union Banking Corporation of New York City. Not only did it finance numerous aspects of Hitler's rise to power, along with actual materials during the war, it was also a Nazi money laundering bank, which was eventually exposed for having millions of dollars of Nazi money in its vaults. The Union Banking Corporation of New York was eventually seized for violations of the Trading with the Enemy Act. Guess who the director and vice president of the Union Bank was? Prescott Bush, our current president's grandfather, and of course our former president's father. Keep that in mind when considering the moral and political dispositions of the Bush family.